So you're probably familiar with this champagne, Veuve Clicquot, iconic egg yolk label. But are you familiar also with the story behind this champagne? In fact, the woman who built not only this prestigious luxury brand, but also really the champagne empire was a large part of that. Well, that's exactly what we're going to learn about tonight with our guest here on the Sunday Sipper Club. I'm Natalie McLean, editor of Canada's largest wine review site at nataliemclean.com, and you've tuned in where we gather every Sunday at 6 p.m. to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. Now, before I introduce our guest, in the comments below or to the side, wherever you're watching from, have you ever tried Veuve Clicquot champagne? I'm guessing that many of you have, but I'd love to know. Just yes or no, have you tried this champagne? Let's get warmed up, shall we, with that. All right. So, as I mentioned, our guest this evening, she is an associate professor of English at Colby College in Maine, and she has a winemaking certificate from the University of California at Davis. She's also the author of the New York Times best-selling Eno biography, The Widow Clicquot, The Story of Champagne, of the Champagne Empire and the Woman Who Built It, among other wine books. And 5 years ago, she emigrated to British Columbia, where she is the owner and winemaker at her family's vineyard, Purcell Vineyard in Saanich. And that's where she joins me now live. Welcome to the Sunday Sipper Club, Tilar Mazzeo. Sorry. Okay, great.
It's so nice to be here.
Terrific. Thank you for joining us. And I was fascinated by the book you wrote, but let's start at the beginning, shall we? Where did you get the idea to write about Veuve Clicquot? Because there are other widows, but you were intrigued by this woman. Why was that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a long-time fan of wine, but really the story started when I had a not very happy job at one point in the Midwest. And some girlfriends and I agreed that Veuve Clicquot was our favorite champagne. And so we used to get together and drink a bottle of wine of an evening and have our husbands drive us home. And we were talking one day, and I remembered that Veuve in French is widow. And it really started with a question where I said, well, was there really a widow Clicquot? And ended up doing research and found this amazing story about a woman who not only became history's first international businesswoman, but who invented a process, which I know we can talk about a little bit, called remuage, that is still used in the wine industry today. And it was really the thing that moved champagne from being a luxury product that was so expensive that only the kings and queens of France could afford it, to a luxury product that those of us who are lucky of a weekend can take a sip of.
Wow, good synopsis. It's like you've given that before.
Yeah. Thought about that once or twice before.
Absolutely. So take us to the beginning then. How did she manage to do this, get this going? What were some of her innovations and yeah. What was she most remarkable for?
Yeah, I mean, a part of the really remarkable aspect of her story, I think, is the fact that by all rights, she should never have run this business. So she was married, and it was an arranged marriage, although they were lucky to have genuinely fallen in love. She was married to a young man whose father, like her, was an entrepreneur in the textile business in the Champagne. And sometimes in order to round out shipments, they would add the local wine if the boat was already not quite full. And so her husband, Francois, decided that he really wanted to develop a wine industry, and his father Philippe said, "Don't do it. There's no money in the wine industry. Tell me about it." And he insisted, and his father let him, and he ended up driving the company to the brink of bankruptcy. Some people said he committed suicide because he had disappointed his father so terribly. Wow. And then after her husband's death, she says to her father-in-law, "Can I take a crack at running this wine business?" And amazingly, her father-in-law, because she has no business experience, women in that time don't run businesses.
What year was this?
This would have been in the 1780s, 1790s.
Wow. And how old was she?
She was in her mid-20s.
Mid-20s, okay.
All right. And she'd been educated. She had no education in business. And so her father-in-law says, sure, and he agrees to bankroll her basically the equivalent of $1 million. But he says you have to do an internship. And so he sets her up to do an internship for 4 years with a partner. And at the end of 4 years, that business is bankrupt again. And she goes back to her father-in-law and says, I know that didn't work out so great, but any chance you'd give me another $1 million? And he did. I mean, for me, like as a writer and as a winemaker, the most amazing part of that story is the fact that her father-in-law saw something in her where he was willing to take a gamble, not only on an inexperienced business person, not only on a woman, not only on somebody in their 20s, but on somebody who had already failed. And she does. And then within 10 years of that, it's at the final stages of the Napoleonic War. And she has this idea because Jean-Remy Moet of Moet and Chandon is her arch rival. He doesn't believe that a woman can run a wine business. And so as the Napoleonic War is coming to a conclusion, she has the idea that if she can smuggle some of her champagne from what she knew was the 1811 vintage, was one of the two great vintages of the 19th century. Okay. She knew that if she could smuggle it in, she could beat Jean Remy to the Russian market and could capture market share. So she does. And she also knows that if the ship goes down, if it ends up getting confiscated, because of course it's still in the middle of a war, that she will go bankrupt, that it's all over. But amazingly, her agent gets there. It's the first champagne, and within months, she is world famous. The Tsar has declared he won't drink anything else. And the name of the Widow Clicquot is just an international phenomenon. And she really never looks back from that.
Wow, what a power story. I love that. And I love there was a little rivalry. I never realized there was like that head-to-head with Moet. And now, of course, they're all owned by the same company. But
LVMH, that's right.
Yeah, the luxury brands.
Yeah.
All right. Well, folks, we're just getting started here with Tilar, who is the author of The Widow Clicquot. Great story. Please comment in the, post a comment if you've ever tried this champagne. Veuve Clicquot, very iconic. I'm just checking over on Facebook to see if I can see your comments, because Facebook is always doing little wonky things. But please do comment and let us know if you've tried it or if you can see and hear us. So anyway, we'll keep going here on this discussion while we wait for people to check in. So she beat...
Moet,
yes, to the courts. Yeah. So was that during the Napoleonic blockades, the shipping blockades? Was that happening? Yeah, okay.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so she had to bypass all of that. And then what was her next big step? What did she innovate next?
Right. So then what happens is, so she captures this huge market share. Everybody wants Veuve Clicquot champagne. Okay. And the problem is that she can't process the product fast enough, because champagne, I mean, even a non-vintage is a minimum of 18 months. Really, a vintage champagne, and she had just exported all of her vintage champagne, is 3, 5, even 7 years, depending on the house. Okay. And so she had to find some way to speed up the production of bottling in her cellars. And there was just a bottleneck, if you'll forgive the pun, in the production process. Because the old process was something called transvasage, which was a fancy French term for pouring the wine from one bottle to the other and trying to leave the yeast behind. Because when we do a classic second fermentation, right, as you know, and probably some of your listeners know, you take a still wine that's already made, you put some sugar and yeast back in the bottle, you cork it, and then what happens is the yeast ends up consuming the sugar, creating carbon dioxide, bubbles, and creating more alcohol. But then the problem is, what do you do with the yeast? Because the consumer typically doesn't like yeasty floaty bits in the bottom of wine bottles. Although as a raw winemaker, personally, I'm enamored of this process, but most consumers don't want yeast, aren't willing to tolerate it. So how do you get rid of the yeast? So they used to just pour it from bottle to bottle. And then she had the idea that, well, what if I took my kitchen table down into the cellars and I popped some holes in it and I turned the wine bottles upside down? Wouldn't gravity work with me? And everybody said, that is a crazy idea. It's never going to work. She said, take my kitchen table down to the cellar and drill me some holes. And that is still what is known, that was a process known as remouage. And when you see those riddling racks now.
Right. They're always shaped like this, and they have holes, like
that
two tables.
Table, just with a hinge in the middle.
I love it.
That allowed her to expedite the process. And it was a great story with the rivalry, because Jean-Remy Moet He was going crazy. He couldn't figure out how it was that she was speeding this up. And in a real sign of her employees' loyalty, it was years before he was able, in a small town environment, to find out, because her employees were so loyal to her.
That's fantastic. And I love that she's such a practical woman. Yeah, take the kitchen table, take it down here. We'll just fix things up. Yeah, we don't need the table. We'll have TV dinners on our lap or something.
Exactly. That's
great. Awesome. So now the comments are pouring in. I'm glad we're connected. I'm going to relay some of these to you, Tilar. Lori Kilmartin says, it's really interesting to hear how riddling came about. And let's see, Kimberly White is here. Great story. Love Clicquot. Jillian Daw Taylor. I live for bubbles. Paul and Patty Hollander are here from Virginia. That's our favorite champagne, and the one we have for special occasions. So folks, if you love this champagne, you should read the book. Do you have your book with you there, Tilar?
I do. Have
Excellent. Hold it up if we can see it.
I will.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got that iconic egg yolk.
Lady,
yes.
There
we go. Absolutely.
It's actually a color known as Clicquot yellow. And the company very kindly let me have permission to use the actual color, which is trademark.
Yes.
Which is pretty neat. Yeah.
And I've been to Clicquot Winery, as I'm sure you have many times, but they've got a whole sort of museum of counterfeits over there. Don't they? And that's fascinating. Golf balls, bubble baths, everybody who's tried to steal that color or the name Clicquot. It's fascinating. And let's see who else is here. Beverly Aslan has tried the Clicquot champagne. Excellent. And I assume you like it. So, okay, folks. So, all right. So she discovers riddling, and that helps her up her production. Was she known for anything else beyond that? Those are major innovations, getting it to the court, branding it, being first to market, getting through the blockade, sort of a direct sampling program, and then the riddling, the technical innovation. Was there anything else that she did?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing there's two other things I think are really interesting about her. One of them is that she effectively begins what we think of today as modern wine tourism. So she lives a very, very long life. And at the end of her life, she's known as La Grande Dame. And still the vintage of Clicquot is called La Grande Dame in her honor. She was also known locally as the Queen of France. And she became, especially for North American tourists, she became a destination. So she, late in her life, bought a chateau at Purcell, and the train stopped right at the bottom of her chateau, just by coincidence. And so everybody wanted to come and get a glimpse of the Grande Dame. And she said, sure, come and visit my chateau, and you're welcome to buy my wine. So she really, along with another one of the great widows of the Champagne, Louise Pommeret, who was a younger generation, and Louise Pommeret really modeled herself after the widow Clicquot, and picked up on this idea. And so Louise Pommeret built her chateau right in the middle of downtown. Wow. And the story, the second thing I think is so interesting, to go back to the color, the story of the color is one of the few mistakes that Barbe Nicole was her name, the widow Clicquot, one of the few business mistakes that she made. In that time, champagne was drunk very, very sweet. Something, sweeter than the sweetest Sauterre that you'd find on the market today. Very, very sugary, high residual. And so Barbe Nicole had the ice when she found out that Louise Pommeret was making a brut champagne, so a dry champagne. She said, that will never sell. That's a crazy idea. Madame Pommeret is wrong. Well, Louise Pommeret had gone to boarding school in England, and she knew that the English taste really was not for something quite so sweet. And so Louise Pommeret also becomes very quickly a spectacular financial success and kind of legendary figure. Wow. Barbe Nicole had the grace to admit she was wrong, and the yellow label is for the brut. It's still for the Veuve Clicquot brut, and that was the color she invented at that time in order to develop a product that could compete with Madame Pommeret's brut champagne.
Wow. Oh, I love it. Wow. These women were rocking back then. Yeah. And does brut mean brutal, as in it was kind of a brutally dry taste at the time? Does that connect at all?
It probably does through the Latin. I mean, I think it's in French the sense of strong, right? Okay, right. But I suspect that strong and brutal, I'm not a Latin scholar, Natalie. I suspect probably it's Greek. Somebody will write and they'll know way more than we will about that.
Sure.
My guess, I'm just going to say yes and wait till we're corrected by somebody who knows more.
It'll be coming along shortly. No, that's
No
fine.
doubt. Thank you all.
And Louise Pomeroy, I've been to that chateau as well. She's got all of the, is it 11 miles or something, or kilometers of caves underground in
Yeah.
Champagne? Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's hundreds of miles of Champagne, Lake Creguer, the caves that run under, and they go back to Roman times.
Okay.
But yeah, Louise Pomeroy was one of the people who first opened those up to tourists, and she named them after cities in England in order to sweeten her.
Gosh,
It was a
what
very good business
marketing
woman,
genius.
wasn't she?
Yeah,
Kind
and
of.
these were big caves. Like they have street signs
Yeah.
under underneath, or like naming all the streets. It's really worth visiting Champagne for all these grand chateaux. They're beautiful
Yeah,
works of
they're
art.
beautiful. And it's not a highly touristed part of France. It's one of my favorite parts of France because even though it's 45 minutes on the fast train out of Paris,
Yeah.
people don't go. So you kind of get a secret part of France that's not overrun. I love it.
That's fantastic. Wow. I welcome Elaine Bruce has just, Elaine Peters has just joined, and Matteo Cav- Cavazzi. Sorry, I'm going to brutalize everybody's name. Matteo, I think I'll just say. But Lori is asking, did she remarry? Did the widow Clicquot remarry?
She never did remarry,
Okay.
but there is pretty clear evidence that she did have love affairs.
Oh, excellent. How racy.
So she never did remarry, but she seemed to have a thing for handsome young German cellar workers. Uh,
Wow.
so yes, and so she nearly did at one point disastrously sign control of the company over to one of the employees, and then ultimately another employee did take over the company. I mean,
Okay.
she lived to be a very old lady.
Sure.
So no, she didn't remarry, but she
Great.
did like the gentleman.
That's great. I love all this human aspects to this story. Now, you've also written about Chanel number 5. So do you have a fascination for these powerful women? Is that a thread going through your writing?
It is. Exactly. I mostly tend to write about strong women. I have a real interest for some reason in strong business women. I'm not totally sure why that is. I guess as a businesswoman, maybe that's part of it. And I have a particular interest in French culture, European culture, and in wine. For me, the perfume book, I had written a book on not a biography of Coco Chanel, but a biography of that perfume.
Okay.
Because it really was a perfume that had a life of its own, and there were a whole series of really interesting legal battles. But part of what I had wanted to know in that perfume was in that book was what's the connection between perfume and wine, right? I mean, when we appreciate wine, most of what we're appreciating is really the smell. What we think of as taste is mostly smell.
Absolutely.
And really, it's just aromatic volatiles in wine, aromatic volatiles in perfume. It's just, you don't want to drink the alcohol that's in the perfume because you'll do your liver in really quick.
Yeah, but there are so many parallels. Like I've read that book, The Making of a Perfume.
Yeah,
There were two perfumes, Sarah Jessica Parker's and Hermes or something.
that's right.
That holds, I think, a special fascination for those of us who love wine because the sense of the smell is so powerful in both, and the nosers kind of in both industries.
Yeah. I was invited when I was working on the research for that book to go and spend some time in the Perfume Lab with a perfume professor named Ron Wingrad, who's a fabulous perfume professor at IFF, which is International Flavors and Fragrances.
Okay.
That's the company that was involved in helping the development of the perfumes in that book you're talking about. And one of the things I thought was incredibly interesting was, you learn about esters and aldehydes. And, I hadn't understood until the perfume book that there were a range of aldehydes that have different carbon weights and that they really have very clear different smells. And so now it's a little bit it's very wine geeky. It's not a little bit wine geeky. But now when I smell a wine, I think, that's an aldehyde. That's that's an ester. And it's a whole other way of thinking about wine, because sometimes the adjectives get a little sideways, thinking
Sure.
of, right? But it's very interesting to think about it that way. At least for me, I learned a lot about wine studying perfume.
Oh, I would love to know what's an aldehyde and an ester. I would love to be able to separate those and know it, as opposed to that's an aroma, that's an aroma, that's an aroma. interesting. So I'm just going to pause briefly, folks. If you're enjoying this conversation, which I hope you are, please take a moment to share this video with your friends. And if you do so, we will be drawing next week for a signed copy of Tilar's book, The Widow Clicquot. So get sharing and get commenting. When you share, please tell your friends why you're interested, why they might be interested, and also take a moment to follow. And then you'll know when we go live every week. At the end of this conversation, I will be announcing the winner of last week's draw. Alrighty. So Tilar, you have also, I'll acknowledge some comments before I move on to your other wine books. So Doug Stegar has joined, as has Alejandro Aguirre. Again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing here. Kimberly Windle says there's a big football game on today, or I am sure you'd be getting more questions on this interesting story. Thanks for sharing your time and a lovely story. I never knew this wine had such drama attached to it. I would love to meet her. I'm not sure if you mean Tilar or the Veuve Clicquot widow, but I'm sure you mean both, Kimberly. That's great.
I'd love to meet the widow too. I think that would be great.
Wouldn't that be great to share a bottle with her? That's actually one of my questions, so that might be what your answer would be. But so awesome. So you have also, we'll come back to the widow, but I also wanted to mention that you've written other books. You have a series of books called Backlane Wineries in Napa. You're working on one for New York. Tell us about that series.
Yeah, exactly. So I had lived in Sonoma County, California for quite a long time in a little village named Cotati, and loved it. But when I first moved there, although I was a pretty confident wine drinker, I would drive around in my first year there and see these little handwritten signs, and it would say, wine tasting down this dirt road. And I admit I was intimidated. I thought, I don't want to go. I mean, who's down there? Like, I'm like a fool of myself. It'd be embarrassing. I don't have the money to go buy like $1,000 bottle of wine if it's Screaming Eagle by mistake, which of course it wouldn't be, But so I got the idea that there should be a guidebook for people like me and like you who are confident wine drinkers who know a lot, but still are a little bit intimidated at the idea of actually showing up at a winemaker's garage and being like, hey, what are you doing? So I started out with a guidebook called the Backlane Wineries of Sonoma. And it was exactly that. It was small artisanal family-owned wineries was my focus, all under 10,000 cases. But in many cases, most of the wineries in the book, and there's about 70 in each, most of them make under 1,000 cases. Wow. So these are really small production. They're mostly not distributed. And then Paul Hawley at Hawley Wines up in the Dry Creek is a friend, and he's also a great photographer. He agreed to come and do the photographs. It was great having somebody do photographs who is himself a winemaker and knew a lot about that. So did first the Sonoma, and that did really well. So we went on and did Napa. And then actually I can show you the cover.
Please do.
It's not out yet. So this is the pre-release cover of the Backlane Wineries of Napa.
Hold it up right in front of your face if you don't mind.
Here.
There we go. Yes, there we go. Awesome. Thank you.
And that one I'm now doing with another writer named Nish Guerra. And then a man named Peter Vibruga is our photographer who also does some great photographs.
Terrific.
So I think next there maybe needs to be one of California, Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
I think Champagne. Maybe one in Ontario.
Yes. And how about BC? Ontario and BC. Please do that.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea.
Oh, yeah. And what a nice segue. Now, you and your husband have a vineyard in BC on, I'm going to mispronounce it again, Sanishtishton?
Sanishtishton. It's a First Nations word, yeah.
Sanishtishton, sorry. So locate that in relation to Vancouver. Where is this?
So we are on the little island known as Vancouver Island.
Okay, where Victoria is.
Yeah, we're Victoria. We're about 20 minutes north of Victoria.
Okay.
So on what's known as the Saanich Peninsula.
Okay.
So most people, when they think about wines on Vancouver Island, still think about the Cowichan, which is a little bit older, a little bit more established, has maybe, 30 wineries. I don't know the Cowichan. They'll yell at me and they'll tell me I have that number wrong. But I'm not from the Cowichan. I'm from the Saanich Peninsula, which we argue is the up and coming wine region, and it's much closer to Victoria. So there's maybe a half dozen wineries up here, and we are the most recently licensed, I think, of them. It's
Oh,
great.
congratulations. That's
Yeah,
fantastic. So
thanks. Yeah.
up till now, had you been providing grapes to another winery, or are the plans to bottle your own now?
Yep, we did.
Yeah.
So early on, we sold to a couple of different neighbors who are winemakers. We got licensed in July. So
Okay.
my first vintage is in the cellar right now.
Okay.
And we're waiting for final construction to finish on our tasting room. So hopefully we'll be open by July.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's exciting. And you were gracious enough to send me a bottle of your
Unlabeled, as you'll say.
unlabeled. Yes, that's okay. I'm sure you know all about branding. Having written about Veuve Clicquot, you'll be an ace at it. But this is a Marysol Foch that you've sent me.
It is.
So
And I don't know I didn't know until I moved to Vancouver Island. I didn't know a lot about Marysol Foch
okay.
because it's not actually a vinifera, right?
Right.
It's a combination of vinifera and a Native American rootstock plant.
Okay.
But it's a real cult wine on Vancouver Island and also to some extent out still in the Okanagan. And so this one we've done through full carbonic maceration. The thing about Marysol Foch is that it's really grippy and tannin, but at the same time, because it's not vinifera, it's not something you're going to put down in your cellar for a decade, right? It's
Sure.
not. It's a pizza and burgers wine. I think
Lovely.
kind of like a Zinfandel,
Yeah.
a little bit lighter. But so what we did is we did that with a full carbonic maceration, which drops a lot of those tannins out
Yeah.
and makes it much more fruit forward. Has those lovely,
It's
you know,
great.
the carbon. Yeah, thanks.
I
We
can't
really
believe
like
it. Like you just bottled this for me, like to send me a sample. It's already
Yeah.
got it together.
Yeah, and that's from
Pretty
this fall.
amazing.
So, I mean, that's the other advantage. Of course, we call it Saanich Nouveau, and we're going to have a big party,
That's
course, in
great.
December. But one of the reasons it's not bottled, you and I had talked about, is that we got permission from the Ministry of the Environment in BC to sell our wines in growlers. And as far as I
Which are
know,
what? Are they big jugs like the beer
well,
comes in, or?
I'll show you. It's this. This is what we're using is these
Oh,
flip top bottles, and
okay.
they have our logo on them.
Yeah.
So the idea is that so much of the environmental impact of the wine industry is either water or glassware.
Hmm.
I can't do anything about the water. I have to clean my winery.
Yeah.
But the bottle, if we go to a growler system, kind of like the breweries do,
Hmm.
then the consumer can not only have a really cool bottle, but and I can reduce the price because I don't have to charge the cost of a bottle that gets thrown away. But it has a really significant environmental impact. So we're going to not be putting it actually in bottles. Our sparkling will have to, but the Marysol Foch we're selling to a local market primarily. Bring me your growler back. We'll fill it up
That's
and
great.
your wine for the week.
So you're basically going to be a cellar door winery where you sell locally.
That's right. We
Yeah.
probably won't distribute off island. I mean, if
Okay.
somebody in Vancouver needed, I could put something on a ferry, but it doesn't because we're making raw wine. So, or what's
And
sometimes
define that raw wine as opposed to what is it, natural wine? Is there a
yeah,
difference
I
between those
don't
two?
think so. No, if
Okay.
in my mind, raw and natural are the same. But the key
Okay.
thing is that so we're farming biodynamically. So we're not using any synthetic fertilizer. We're not using any Roundup. We're not using any fungicides, except we do use baking soda and sulfur, which
Okay.
is a challenge. And then that means that it's very low, radically low intervention winemaking. And I don't put sulfites in when I bottle unless somebody wants me to. I can kill my wine if you want me to do it. But otherwise, we're really fans of the ways in which the raw live enzymes contribute to the flavor and aromatic profiles.
So you believe the sulfites, added sulfites, because sulfites already exist naturally in
Yeah.
wine, but added sulfites kill those natural enzymes and therefore flavors?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, and that's the idea of sulfites is that I
Okay.
couldn't possibly bottle it and
Okay.
send it anywhere without putting sulfur in it
Yeah.
because exactly it sterilizes the wine. It kills
Huh.
the microorganisms that are alive in it.
Interesting.
Um, and it's not, I mean, I do need to do that for my sparkling wine, or else I would have an exploding cellar. So there are really good reasons why people use sulfur, but for us, we're just a little crazy about the winemaking thing, and we've gone radically raw wine, and for us, and we love it. For us,
That's
that's an
awesome.
exciting thing.
That's fantastic. All right. Well, Mike Welling has joined us here, And Jillian Taylor says, what is the name of your winery? And do you, yes, and she does produce her own wine, but remind us the name of your winery. Is it Purcell or Purcell?
It is Purcell Vineyard.
Purcell.
And it's my husband's family name were the Parcells, and they were involved in the 1920s and 30s in the Vancouver Island Loganberry wine industry.
Okay.
So we're starting up a family, an old family brand. We're reinvigorating. My father-in-law has given us all of the old wine equipment, which is pretty neat. It has buckets with the names on it from the 30s. And that way we can joke that we're fourth generation winemakers. We just skipped 2 generations.
That's great. You did learn from the widow Clicquot.
Exactly.
Very smart. That's great.
Come and visit us. We'll be open by July. Anybody
That'd
who's
be
taking
lovely.
a trip to Victoria.
Absolutely. That would be a lovely trip. Now, Lori says, what is the name of your winery? I was on the island a few years ago and there weren't too many others. Yes, it's a developing area. Jillian, where do we find you the next time we are in the area? So, are you close to the town, the little town? Or?
So we're really close to the ferry and the airport. We're about, I think we're at 8 kilometers south of the ferry. We're about 20 kilometers north of Victoria.
Okay.
So if anybody wants to shoot me an email, I'd be happy to put them on our grand opening blast list and keep them on there. And we won't send spam to anybody, I promise.
Well, wine doesn't pair well with spam, but
no.
That's fine. And we can put those details in the comments after this video is over so that people can connect directly with you, Tilar. That's awesome. All right. So in terms of the winery, what's your role in it now? Are you and your husband both winemakers, or how does it work there?
No, we have a marital division of labor.
I love that.
He is the master of the vineyard.
Okay.
So he does. We're both fully involved in it. I especially do the pruning. But we've agreed for marital reasons that final decision in the vineyard is his decision, and I am the goddess of the winery. So I am the winemaker. I make all the decisions in the winery. Of course, we're married, and this is the labor of love, so we do all of that together. But yes, we did learn early on that one of the great debates that we have is to till or no till in the vineyard. I'm a no tiller. I think he's going to end up being a tiller. There's a philosophical divide between us.
And what are the pros and cons without getting too deep into the technical stuff of tilling the earth?
Yeah. So really, my argument as a no-till advocate in biodynamic farming is that every time you turn the soil over, you disrupt the anaerobic microorganisms. The whole idea of biodynamic farming is the microbiome. His argument on the other side is that we're recuperating land still that was not biodynamically or organically farmed for a long time.
Okay.
And he's having a hard time getting the nutrients into the soil that he needs for the vines to do really well. So there are good arguments on both sides, but in order to avoid the argument, we've decided he can make the final decisions there, and then I'm the winemaker and run the winery.
That's awesome. Wow. Good negotiating skills. Yeah. That's great. I think you guys will last.
I hope so.
We're having such a good discussion. So folks, if you are enjoying this, please take a moment to share this video with people that you think would enjoy it. Tell them why, and click follow. Next week, we will also be drawing for a signed copy of Tilar's book, The Widow Clicquot, the Widow Clicquot, and for sharing. And so do it even if you're watching the replay, because I know a lot of you catch this on the replay as opposed to live. You can still comment below and we'll respond, but also the draw doesn't happen until next week. And at the end of this session, I'll be drawing for last week's winner, so stay tuned on that. All right. Jillian says, being the goddess of the winery is the best title. Okay.
I think I should put that on my business card.
You should. I should have adjusted the nameplate underneath you. All right. So, let me just go back to some things because I wanted to make sure we got to your vineyard and the other books, but maybe some more general wine questions now, Tilar. I don't want to forget about this because you do have something interesting. What is your favorite wine gadget?
Oh, yes, you had asked me to think about that.
Yeah.
Okay, I have no idea who makes them.
Okay.
And personally, again, my husband will never forgive me for saying this, Natalie, but Personally, I don't have any trouble opening champagne bottles we have glass skylights in our kitchen.
Oh.
And I watch my husband open champagne bottles and it fills me with fear. I was taught by a very handsome French man once who told me, if it's not too risque for your listeners, that the way to open a champagne bottle, of course, is to, you hold the cork in your hand and then you twist the bottle, and then it should make a sigh like a woman who is enjoying her date. Which only a Frenchman would tell you, right?
Yep.
So of course, I practiced many times and can now open it appropriately. But my husband does tend to be a menace with opening champagne bottles. He says it's because I don't let him do it often enough. So I found one day in a thrift store in Sydney, and I have no idea who makes it again, but it's called a champagne wrench. Oh. And so what it is it's this little wrench that you just put over the top of a champagne bottle like this.
Okay, hold it up a little bit more.
Yeah, you do this.
Yep.
And you just turn it and it loosens it. But it also has, because it's closed on the top, the champagne cork can't fly away, and you have complete control over opening it.
So it's different from a nutcracker. I was thinking, can you just take a walnut cracker or something? But it's different.
If you look at it, I don't know if you can see.
Yeah,
it's like
it's
got that thing in there.
Okay.
So it's the coolest thing ever. You just do it, and you're at a dinner party, and you don't have to stress about, whether you're gonna make a fool of yourself opening it. Yeah. So I paid $2 for it at the thrift store. I have no idea where they come from. It was still in the packaging, so it must be modern.
Yeah.
But yes, that is my wine gorilla tip of the week.
That is fantastic. I love that. We'll have to look on Amazon to see if they're available anywhere else, but I love that. All right. So we were sort of alluding to this, and I'm not sure, maybe your answer is the Veuve Clicquot, but is there any person, living or dead, that you would love to share a bottle with, a bottle of wine? Who would that be?
Yeah, well, she'd be great. But, you'd also asked me to think about who my favorite winemaker is. And do you know about, I'm not going to pronounce their name right, is it Lalou Leroy?
Oh, yes.
She's just the coolest lady. If I were going to write a biography of a really cool lady in the wine industry, that's who it would be. I also want to be like that. I think she's maybe a little older than I am. But when I am a little bit older, I want to be a cool lady like her.
She's crazy in a good way. I met her for my first book, and she cooked me this chicken dinner, roast chicken in the oven that was making my eyes water because it was smoking. And we talked about the foolishness of wine writers, and I just had to nod and agree because she's talking about fruit salad description. I'm
going, company included, I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't think she cared. And then she took me out back where all her astrological signs were, and she has all these rocks, and she's fascinating. You've got to meet her in person.
I love her. I'd love to meet her. And then I saw that documentary where she'd been interviewed talking about Burgundy wine, and because of course she does the biodynamic, and she was out talking to the vines. I'm like, oh my God, I'm not the only one who goes and talks to the vines.
Vine whisperer, really. She's crazy. And of course, she used to work at Domaine Romani Conti. So, first I met Aubert de Villaine, and then over to there. What a contrast in personalities, but still some of the fundamental principles were so similar. You've got to sit down.
I would love to meet her. So that's the person I want to have my glass of wine with. I'll have to choose between her and the Widow Clicquot. The Widow Clicquot will forgive me.
Well, Lalou Leroy, she is getting on in age, so get on that. But she's fantastic. She's very smart, very snippy in a good way, interesting way, like your sharpest school teacher who just whomped you for every dangling participle, but you loved her in the end for it.
Luckily, I'm not snippy at all.
No, because you are an English professor. I've been conscious about leaving prepositions at the end of sentences.
It's terrible, isn't it? My reputation precedes us.
My mother and my grandmother were both English school teachers, and English was a passion. But so maybe you could share with us perhaps the weirdest wine pairing you've ever had.
Yeah, so the weirdest I've ever had is red sparkling wines. I remember I was in Sonoma at one point, and I was doing research for the Backlane Wineries in Sonoma. And it was coming up on Thanksgiving. And I remember, I'm pretty sure that one of the wines in it was Wattle Creek, makes a sparkling Shiraz. And it was really neat, right? And so after that, I had done a tasting at one point with a bunch of different sparkling reds, especially since at Thanksgiving or for fall, kind of winter holiday feasts, you're always looking for something that is sparkling with all those connotations of celebration, but that maybe is a little bit more robust than a white wine. Mm-hmm. So for me, I'm a big fan of that. I don't know if I have no plans to make it. I'm pretty sure I think it's they're hard to make, I think, because getting that balance right is really, really tricky. I think if somebody's great and has really the right fruit, you probably can pull that off. But yeah, so for me, if you haven't ever had a sparkling red wine, I suggest trying that, especially around the fall holidays.
Okay, so and your pairing would be then with a turkey dinner or
this was with a turkey dinner, exactly.
Yeah.
It was a turkey dinner and the stuffing,
yeah.
And it's like all of those. Especially the richness of a stuffing. Sometimes the champagne I find is a little bit too light. I mean, you can do something that vintage champagne, of course, can hold up to anything. But if you're really in the kind of Prosecco or non-vintage price point, you need something sometimes a little bit more sturdy to hold up, I find, to the kind of fats and butters in all of my dressing, at least.
That's great. Awesome. And kind of as we're wrapping up here on the wine questions, what's the best piece of wine advice you've ever received?
Tasting or growing?
Let's do both.
Both.
Yeah.
Let's see. The best advice I ever got about tasting, which I try to remember now that we're coming up on having a tasting room as well, is how really subjective wine tasting is. And that there are a lot of studies. I'd done, as you mentioned, I had done the winemaking certificate program at UC Davis. And in fact, my husband and I have just started the viticulture program at Washington State as well. So we'll see. I've never fought so hard for bees in my entire life as in organic chemistry as a winemaker. Tough stuff. But really, one of the things that you learn in a winemaking degree program is that all the studies show that tasting wine is hugely subjective. So that's why when you go out to a winery and, you're sitting there in front of palm trees and it's the Tuscan Palace and everybody's happy, everything tastes better. Everything really does taste better. But that also means that or at least for me, if you think at home about drinking wine a kind of experience, not only does your appreciation of the wine automatically go up, but your evening is improved as well. So for me, tasting, that was important to remember because, before I was making wine, like you, I was writing about wine and, not criticizing wine. I was really careful. I didn't, wine is different. People have different tastes. And so I saw my job as a wine writer really to describe the wine and then leave the consumer to make his or her own judgments about whether that was your style or not. It had to be a good wine, but there's a lot of good wine that some people just don't like because it's not their taste. So for me, I always tried to remember that if I went and something didn't taste good to me, I needed to think about whether I was being unfair to that winemaker and whether maybe I was having a bad day or maybe we hadn't got off on the right foot or maybe it was too hot. And to remember to try again when I was in a good mood.
Yeah, it's true. It's contextual.
So for me, that was really, it's so contextual, right? And then for me in the growing and the winemaking side of it is, people always say it's a truism that wine is made in the vineyard. And especially when you come through a winemaking program, it's really easy to imagine that with all that organic chemistry, we can control what happens in the winery. And one of the things that I had come to learn is that if I have to control things in the winery, something probably went wrong somewhere. And that it is really true that I think good winemaking is learning to get out of the way of good fruit. And that if you're not obsessed about your fruit, you're not obsessed about your wine. So
that's
we're
great.
on a steep learning curve as farmers. But
I like the way you put it. Get out of the way of good fruit. And yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we are going to wrap up here, Tilar. Folks, I've got some important announcements, though, so stay with me for another 10 minutes. But Tilar, this has been a fantastic discussion. You've shared all kinds of great stories and tips and value. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way to get in touch with you? Is it a website? Is it Twitter? Is it the winery site? Email?
So probably the best would be either to send me an email, which is
Okay.
parcellvineyard@gmail.com,
Okay.
or Twitter, which is @parcellvineyard. And I'd be delighted to hear from anybody, especially if you're coming out. If you've got questions about Veuve Clicquot, or always happy to talk wine. It was great talking with you all here and with your listeners out there on the Ethernet.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you again, Tilar. And I will send you a link to this so that you can also read all the comments. Lots of comments pouring in now. I guess people are bored with the game, but we're getting more and more recruits all the time. But thank you again for sharing your stories with us. It was an absolute delight.
Thanks for the invite. Take care.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, folks. So we are going to do a few things here before we wrap up. Of course, announce last week's winner, but that was a fantastic discussion. And as I do with every weekday or week guest, I'm going to send Tilar the link to this video. So please keep your comments and questions coming tonight and over the next week. If you're watching the replay, still comment, because she'll jump in, I'll jump in. So this is a open commenting until then. So one thing I would love to know from you folks is, what was the most interesting thing that you learned tonight? Please post that in the comments. I always like to see what is it about our discussion that you enjoyed most, so that I can plan our future discussions and future guests. And if you have a suggestion for a future guest, let me know. I do want to let you know that although we are wrapping up this discussion, those who are in the Get Wine Smart course, we're having a chocolate and wine tasting tonight to get warmed up for Valentine's Day. So that will be fun. And yes, I will be coming around to the winner momentarily. Next week, I should tell you that it's Jennifer McLagan. She has written several award-winning books on charcuterie and bitter foods. We're going to be pairing different sorts of charcuterie, pate, serrano ham, sausage, with wine. So if you're interested in that, please tune in next week. I'll have a blog post ready that tells you, if you want to pick up the different pieces of charcuterie and wines and taste along with us to see if you get what we are getting, to comment and share your perceptions. That would be awesome. Last week's guest, if you missed it, we had Jane Masters, who's a master of wine. She was talking about the grueling process to become a master of wine. So if you missed that episode, you can always go back and watch previous episodes, and I'll post a link to that in the comments. So Jillian Daw says, I love seeing successful women in wine thriving in the industry no matter where they are in the journey. Amen, Jillian. Beverly says, everything but wine tasting is quite interesting. I'm not quite sure what you mean, Beverly. I think I get it, but I'm not sure. You're welcome, Beverly. Becky Almo just joined. Dave Head joined. And Jillian, I see you were asking about biodynamic winemaking. I will send Tilar this link, and I'm sure she'll get back to you and any other questions below that you folks post. So, now, last week was Jane Masters, and so we are going to have, I have this noise making thing from a friend. I don't know if he's online tonight, Alan Cameron, but it's so funny. Oh, it's a different noises here. Oh, no, that's not good, is it? I was trying to look for the one that would be, oh, the drum roll. That's what I was looking for to announce the winner. Ta-da! Okay. So the winner, and I'm just looking this up in my notes to make sure I get it right, from last week is Dave Head. There you go, Dave Head. Email me, you know where I am. You're getting a signed copy of my book. So next week's winner will get a signed copy of the Veuve Clicquot book. And so if you're watching the video replay, you can still qualify by taking a moment to share this and make a comment as to why people would enjoy it, why you did, and follow. And then you'll always know when we go live. So as always, folks, thank you so much for spending your time with me here tonight. I hope you enjoy it. And I will see you next week on the Sunday Sipper Club at 6 p.m. Eastern, where we gather every week to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. Take care.